There are many ways to position, scale, and rotate layers in a composition, both using the timeline and directly from within the composition panel itself. Let's start by transforming a layer directly in the composition panel. Go to the tool panel in the upper left corner of the interface and make sure you have the selection tool selected. Then navigate over to the logo in the composition panel and click once to select it. And you'll notice the logo selected when you see the control handles around the outside edge of the layer. Now we're going to reposition this logo into the lower right corner of the composition panel. And as we do that, we'll click inside the handles, making sure not to click directly on this center anchor point. So I'm going to click inside the handles and drag to the lower right corner of the composition panel. And when you get somewhere close to the edge, it doesn't have to be exact, just go ahead and let go of your mouse. Now to scale the logo down, let's move our mouse to one of the corner handles and then click and drag directly on the handle. And if you just click and drag, notice you can accidentally distort the logo. To keep it in proportion, hold down Shift after you start to drag. So I'm going to scale this down to about 60%, and I know it's 60% because I see that in the info panel. Now, in order to let go, I'm going to let go of my mouse first, and then I'll let go of Shift. That way I don't accidentally distort the logo. You may have noticed when I adjusted the scale adjusted around this center anchor point. This is called the anchor point of the layer, and the anchor point also determines what point the object rotates around. Now I'm going to go back up on my toolbar and I'll click on the rotation tool. You can also press W on your keyboard to select that tool. With the rotation tool active, notice how the cursor changes. Now if I hover over one of the corner handles and click and drag, I can rotate the logo. And if I hold down Shift as I drag, it'll snap in 45-degree increments. Once you're finished playing with the rotation tool, go ahead and make sure the logo is back in its original vertical position and press V on your keyboard to grab the selection tool from the tool panel. Another way to position objects in the scene is through the timeline. So let's go to layer 1 and open the triangle so we can see the transform options. If your transform options are not open, go ahead and click on the triangle until you can see all the different transform options. Notice with all of the options open, we run out of vertical real estate in the timeline rather quickly. So there's an easier way to access each one of these different parameters. I'm going to press P on my keyboard to open the position parameter. And with position open, I have two parameters here, X and Y. And notice when I hover over any of the parameters, I get a double arrow icon with a finger, which means I can scrub that parameter. So let's hover over the Y parameter and click and drag to scrub and reposition this element a little further down in our composition panel. In order to work quickly in the timeline, you'll want to use keyboard shortcuts. We already know P for position, but there's also S for scale, R for rotation, T for opacity, and A for anchor point. I'm going to scrub on the anchor point Y parameter. Let's click and drag, and I'll reposition the anchor point in between our logo word and our logo mark. Now when I press R and open rotation, notice rotation has two parameters. The first one is the number of rotations. The second parameter is actual degrees within a rotation. So I'll hover over the second parameter, click and drag to scrub, and now notice it's going to rotate around my repositioned anchor point. So I'll just Control Z on Windows or Command Z on the Mac to undo, and I'll press P to open the position parameter and scrub on the Y parameter to reposition this back down. In addition to being able to scrub on parameters, you can also just type directly into the parameter. So let's make this logo a little more transparent. So I'll press T for opacity, and I'll change its value from 100% to 50%, and I'll press Enter when I'm finished, and that will set the value. Now once you're finished, in order to collapse a layer, you can just press the same keyboard shortcut. So for example, I'll press T for opacity, and I'll just click below any of the layers to deselect, and now I can see exactly what things are going to look like in the composition panel. Now I have to tell you, my preferred method for applying transformations to layers and compositions is to actually work directly in the timeline. That way you know exactly which layer and parameter you'll be adjusting while getting a preview of the transition. This method definitely becomes more helpful the more layers you have in a composition.